Yes, I think we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this event of today. Today we're going to talk with Cherilyn from the US. Good morning, Sherry, and Alisha from South Africa about NIST Cybersecurity Framework. This is going to be the agenda for today. So I just explained to Alisha and Sherry that my only added value for today is going to be the button master and the timekeeper. Going to do a short introduction there. Then Alisha is going to take over. She's an acting CISO, if I'm correct at this moment, right, Alisha, from South Africa, with one of the largest retailers over there. And she's going to moderate the session from Cherilyn, who is leading some of the developments of the NIST cybersecurity framework program from the US, but also in Brussels, in the Netherlands, and traveling all over the world. I heard last week. We're going to end the session. There's a lot of room at about 2:30 for a Q&A. So the way it works, in your right button on the page right now, there's a question mark that says questions. Please ask your questions immediately when you've got something to ask based upon the content or any other open question. Do that now, and Alisha is going to be the boss for today. Oh, she's leaving now. And she's going to either break into Cherilyn, your presentation, or save the questions for after the presentation from Cherilyn. So we are the organizers, me and Alisha together. We are part of the CISO tribe, which is basically a small group of CISOs that come together once every month, talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly in cyber. And also we have defined some focus areas that are of interest at this moment to us, and therefore we think they're also of interest to you as well. One of them, of course, is artificial intelligence. I'm almost looking back to the days when we were only talking about crypto and blockchain, but today it's all ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. So that's one of our focus areas as well. Third-party risk. I believe, Sherry, that NIST has done some good work over here as well with frameworks. We're also looking into that. Also on the software side, the software bill of materials is something that we're looking into as well. Of course, for those of you that are participating from Europe, but also outside of Europe with European branches, we're looking at the different types of European legislations, where it seems that the European Commission has just saved up all their time in 5 years and just bury us under all types of legislation right now. So we're looking at the NIS directive, but also at DORA, and also to some of the directives that are very much aimed at the critical infrastructure operators. Last one, metrics and KPIs. And of course, one of the other ones is the NIST framework. Looking at this picture, Alisha, I think this is a good time to hand it over to you. This is something that somebody sent to me in one of the courses. I cannot give any credits to the person that created this. I thought it was really funny, but there is some truth in this as well. Handing it over to you, Alisha.
Thanks, Vim. As Vim has mentioned, my name is Alisha Sarabjeeth. I currently reside in Durban, South Africa, and I manage the cybersecurity portfolio for one of the largest retailers in South Africa. When I was asked to manage the portfolio, the NIST framework was already selected as the framework of choice. And obviously, I had to suddenly adapt and adjust. But as I started to work through the actual framework, I actually was quite impressed with the simplicity of the actual framework. And for my strategy build and roadmap build, we needed something that we could adapt to the ever-changing retail landscape. So for me, it was the flexibility and adaptability aspect that truly appealed from a NIST framework perspective. And then in terms of adding in other relevant elements that contributed to the strategy, like the regulatory requirements for PCI, POPIA, GDPR, and with the pressures of external and internal audits, we actually required a framework that we could use, that we could adapt and adjust and suitably customize due to the evolution of cybercrime and the threats landscape. So one of the things to be mindful about in choosing a framework is you need to start off with simplicity. And there are lots of frameworks out there that promise to deliver amazing cybersecurity scores, but it is highly impractical and quite erroneous and highly intensive in terms of the elements that you need to perform in order to be a successful cyber strategist. I think for me, the main challenge around formulation of a cybersecurity strategy was the articulation of NIST to our board and how it fitted together to form a strategy. And for me, that was the key takeaway from my build was before you even start, you need to have your executive board behind you, which is key to get buy-in for financial approval, for change management, for the various elements that's required for a strategy of this nature. Anyway, I'm not the speaker for today. Sherry is. However, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Cherilyn Pascoe. Sherry leads the NIST cybersecurity program and implementation of the framework. She's a senior tech policy advisor on public policy on cyber and AI programs. And she is previously policy advisor to the US Senate prior to joining NIST. Today, Sherry will present around the brief overview of the framework, the process of how changes occur within the framework as they are in the middle of developing the next version of it, as well as any key and pertinent information regarding AI and supply chain security. And we'll keep the questions for Sherry at the end of the session. Thanks. Over to Sherry.
Hi, good afternoon. It is 8 a.m. in Washington, D.C., and the city has decided that it's going to tear up the street outside of my house. So if you hear jackhammering and you can't hear me, please yell, and I'll try to move somewhere quieter. But it's a really great pleasure to speak with all of you about the NIST cybersecurity framework, give you a quick overview, as Alisha mentioned, about kind of what it covers and its benefits, and then give you an update as to the direction that we're heading with the next version of the framework that we're calling CSF 2.0. Next slide, please. So I work at NIST, as was mentioned. NIST, we're a U.S. federal agency located within the Department of Commerce. And our mission is focused on measurement science. So we do a lot of work in the underlying research and development that underpins technical standards. We also do a lot of work in engaging in consensus and international-based standards bodies, and looking for ways generally to advance technology. We've been in the cybersecurity game for the past 50 years. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary, and our work is in cybersecurity started with encryption, looking at cryptographic algorithms. Today, we still do work on encryption, but our work has expanded into other areas, covering all cybersecurity and privacy disciplines, including cybersecurity, workforce, third-party risks, privacy, and as we'll discuss today, cybersecurity risk management. Next slide, please. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is one of our more well-known resources developed by NIST. It is our highest level guidance. We have a lot of cybersecurity guidance, different control sets and things like that. The cybersecurity framework is intended to kind of sit At a higher level, it's focused on cybersecurity outcomes that are intended to be used by both technical and non-technical audiences. As Alisha mentioned, one of its greatest benefits is its kind of flexibility to be able to adapt to various risks, different sectors, different sizes of organizations, different technologies that you may be leveraging within an organization. It also, because it sits at a higher level, many organizations use it to kind of align your legal and regulatory requirements along with your kind of organizational and risk management priorities and your senior leadership risk tolerances and appetites under one kind of comprehensive framework. It is based off of international standards, and it's we leveraged various international standards. The framework has also informed international standards, and I think because of that, it served as a really nice platform that even though it was built, by a U.S. agency, it's being used pretty widely by all sectors around the world. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the framework is pretty popular. We're really pleased with the kind of widespread use of the framework around the world. We have use cases in every sector and in multiple countries. I think the key thing to point out with NIST resources, and this was certainly the case for the development of the framework, is we try to develop our resources in collaboration with the community. The framework was originally developed through a series of public workshops as well as formal written comment periods. There was a lot of kind of sweat equity in those that kind of participated in those workshops around the country. And because of that kind of built-in involvement from the beginning, I think we saw quite a lot of folks develop some ownership over the framework across industry, and that really has resulted in its kind of increased use since then. As we move forward, with the update, this is something that we're going to be doubling down on, is in terms of making sure that the changes that we seek to the framework are based off of the changes that organizations are telling us that they want to see changed, and the cybersecurity challenges that you all are particularly facing. So we've had a couple of workshops already, and I'll give you a little bit later some of the timelines for our future workshops. But these workshops are pretty widely attended. Our first one was about 5,000 attendees from 100 countries. We do employ kind of virtual Slack channels to engage in discussion, and we also host some in-person events in Washington, D.C. if anybody's interested in a long plane ride. We also try to travel to various conferences around the world. A number of us, as we mentioned, were in Brussels the other week to speak at a conference, as well as participate in some meetings. So we always try to post all of our events on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework page. So feel free to check that out and reach out if anybody is interested in doing a one-on-one meeting in person while we are on travel. Next slide, please. So the framework is largely used on a voluntary basis by industry, but there have been a couple of notable examples of kind of governmental policies around the cybersecurity framework that I think are worth pointing out. Within the United States, federal agencies are required to use the framework. We're also seeing increasing references in state legislation requiring states to use the framework. And we're also seeing state legislation around safe harbors to provide some liability protections around cybersecurity associated with using the cybersecurity framework. Most notably, the White House National Cybersecurity Strategy that just came out a few weeks ago talks about harmonization of regulations on cybersecurity across all the various federal agencies within the United States. And the United States takes a very sectoral approach to cybersecurity regulations. So there are dozens of federal regulators that kind of operate in this space. The White House expressed an interest in kind of harmonizing regulations across sectors and using the NIST cybersecurity framework as the kind of platform for that harmonization. Within Europe, obviously you guys are dealing with the NIST directive and a number of other cybersecurity requirements. We've seen a couple of European countries adopt the cybersecurity framework as part of the NIST directive, including Italy and Poland. And so the framework has become mandatory for critical services in a number of countries as well. Next slide, please. The framework has three components. The probably most well-known part of the framework is the core, because that's where the cybersecurity outcomes sit. But there's two other pieces to the framework that I think are worth noting. I think one is profiles. So profiles are kind of a tailoring of the framework core to meet your specific mission of the organization. The cybersecurity outcomes that are included in the core are a great list of outcomes, but they are not prioritized. And so it's kind of helpful to go through and identify the specific actions that might be taken to meet an outcome, as well as prioritize certain outcomes based off of your risks and in your specific threat landscape. There's also implementation tiers, which are focused on kind of the level of risk management strategy that an organization is facing. The cybersecurity framework is really focused around looking at an organization's current cybersecurity posture as well as your future cybersecurity posture. So where do you want to go? And looking at the gap between those two profiles to determine the steps that need to be taken to kind of reach your future status that you're always working towards. So implementation tiers can be helpful to kind of get a better understanding of the level of kind of progress towards your risk management strategy and your risk management program. Next slide, please. So this is what the CSF core looks like. As I mentioned, it is a list of cybersecurity outcomes. These are, you can think of them as the kind of the what in cybersecurity. The how can be found in the list of informative references. These are all of the kind of standards that you're probably already using within your organization to address cybersecurity risks. And many organizations have found it helpful to have a framework that's kind of organized around these existing cybersecurity standards, these existing cybersecurity practices, to be able to organize it under one kind of higher level framework that's organized around these 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And you'll see a number of organizations. Alisha mentioned the kind of importance of working with senior leadership and your executive board with an organization to set your priorities and ensure that your efforts are appropriately resourced. I think one of the biggest use cases that we've seen with the framework is that reporting of your cybersecurity posture around those 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So the functions can be used, to be able to kind of explain to kind of higher level non-technical audiences. And then as you get deeper, into the subcategory and informative references, those are really the kind of meat of the framework to be able to kind of delve in more deeply into some of these cybersecurity practices. Next slide. So we all know there's a lot of cybersecurity standards out there. And so I wanted to specifically highlight a new resource that we just published called the Cybersecurity Privacy and Reference Tool. This is where we've taken a number of our major cybersecurity and privacy publications at NIST. We've taken kind of the cores out of the PDF documents and put them online. And we're going to be leveraging this as kind of the front matter for a database for all of our mappings. So all you see those informative references that I showed you in the core are only a small number of the informative references that can be leveraged along with the cybersecurity framework. And so going forward, we're really looking to spend a lot of time to work with the community to expand mappings to many more standards, sector-specific standards and regulations, so that organizations can kind of make it easier to build your cybersecurity framework profile using this kind of online automated database. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of one of the subcategories of the cybersecurity framework and the various mappings that we already have to various cybersecurity standards. You'll see for each subcategory, we have half a dozen to a dozen mappings. As we move forward with CSF 2.0, we'll certainly be emphasizing the importance of these mappings and kind of working with all of you to leverage the mappings that you've already done and kind of incorporate them into this database. Next slide, please.
Sherry, hi, there's a question. What was the rationale for defining 4 implementation tiers for CSF versus using a more established model like CMMI?
Yeah, so that was actually, there was, I think, a lot of concern in maturity models 10 years ago when the framework was first developed. So we wanted to kind of reemphasize the point about kind of leveraging your risk management maturity as opposed to just your cybersecurity maturity. So the tiers were kind of emphasized to be focused on your risk management strategy rather than looking specifically at your cybersecurity strategy. There's been, I think, a lot of confusion around tiers, and that certainly has shown up in some of the comments that we're getting on the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. So what we're doing right now is looking at if there are additional guidance we can provide on cybersecurity measurement and assessment, and looking at we have a call to action to the community on, aggregating use cases of how organizations are using the cybersecurity framework to assess your cybersecurity programs. I think there's a lot of organizations that are using kind of the CMMI maturity model to assess their cybersecurity programs. There's also probably other kind of models that organizations are using. So we're trying to aggregate all of those kind of best practices, and then we will kind of use those to develop new guidance around cybersecurity assessment. But I think for CSF 2.0, tiers will still exist because we do think it's important to still assess kind of cybersecurity risk management, but there's probably more guidance that we can provide focused on cybersecurity maturity, in addition to kind of the focus on tiers.
There's a question as well, Sherry. I know we said we leave questions for the end, but it's based on your tiers. A few people have asked why PCI DSS, in terms of looking at the illustrative example, they would have thought it would be included, being a global compliance trend. Or
Yeah,
equally ISO 27002, 2022 appear.
Yeah, so we wanted to try to find kind of comprehensive cybersecurity standards that were kind of the initial informative references for the CSF when it was developed 10 years ago. So those are the informative references that you see in the PDF. And that was based off of kind of stakeholder feedback as to which ones were the most kind of widely used across all sectors. Obviously, in the past several years, we've learned that there's lots of cybersecurity standards that folks are using, which is why we've kind of developed the online informative references program, OLIR, that you see here on the slide, so that organizations can submit additional mappings, and why we've leveraged this new CPRT tool to kind of showcase all of those different mappings, so that when we're moving forward with CSF 2.0, we're not just looking at a static PDF with only a few mappings, but we have this online format that can be updatable and include a lot more mappings to various standards. So why don't we continue to the next slide, please? I encourage all of you to kind of check out the cybersecurity resources that we have on the framework website. We have developed about a dozen sample profiles for specific sectors. The financial sector profile that's run by CRI is probably one of the most well-known profiles that's adopted by industry. But there's others for specific sectors that NIST has developed, and other organizations outside of NIST has developed. We've also begun to develop profiles for specific risks. So we have a CSF profile for ransomware that kind of prioritizes the subcategories to address the ransomware risk. That's proven to be very popular. We also are beginning to think about profiles for specific technologies. So rather than just focus on sectors, but look at potentially profiles for kind of IoT or OT security, to try to better identify how the framework can be tailored to specific technologies. So I encourage you to check out those profiles. We do have a call to action to kind of have organizations develop profiles as we move forward with the new version of the framework. So if folks are interested in kind of are part of an organization that would like to kind of develop a profile for a particular sector or particular risk, please reach out, and we're happy to collaborate as we move forward with 2.0. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the framework was originally directed about 10 years ago, and it was first published in 2014. The framework is something that NIST was directed to do under executive order from the president, as well as congressional mandate. The congressional mandate requires that NIST kind of continually update the framework. And so we're stuck with it for a while. The framework was last updated 5 years ago in 2018 with what we call the minor update. And this time around, we're looking to make a major update that we're calling CSF 2.0. Next slide, please.
Sherry, just a question on the build of the CSF. There's a question regarding compliance versus technical. Can I still explore compliance aspects of the NIST framework? Does it require expertise on the technical side of IT and the network side? It also speaks to the people that were involved in the initial build, of 2013. It would have had to have been a collaboration between compliance, governance, and technical.
Yeah, and I think that the framework, I think, is certainly, and something that we want to maintain with CSF 2.0 is something that it is a kind of common taxonomy that can be leveraged by different individuals in the cybersecurity space. So obviously, we want it to be something that folks within CISO's office can understand and leverage, but also your senior leadership, the lawyers and your acquisition officials can understand. And so the focus on kind of using kind of less technical terms is something that we've really been prioritizing as we look at the kind of functions, categories, and subcategories across the framework. The framework has been used in a compliance method. I think, as I mentioned, there have been some governmental mandates for organizations to use the framework. There's also regulations that are aligned with the framework. But I think overall, it's important to keep in mind that the framework is not a list of cybersecurity controls. The controls are found within the informative references. And so it's really hard to treat the framework as a checklist. It's really meant to be something that is leveraged to look at your kind of overarching cybersecurity strategy, where you're at, where you want to go, and look at all the various cybersecurity kind of governance and compliance frameworks that you're leveraging. As we look in terms of kind of who was involved in the development of the framework, we've really strived to kind of have a really inclusive and diverse group of stakeholders that we're working with, and that's across many different industry sectors, academia and government, but also kind of the different disciplines that we're working with, as we develop, CSF 2.0, and was the case as well when we developed the original framework. So at NIST, we have obviously a mix of some very deep technical experts. We have some of the best cybersecurity experts in the world, but we also have, a number of policy and lawyers who are not as technical, like myself, that are focused on making sure that various audiences can leverage the framework. So as we move forward with CSF 2.0, I mentioned that the community engagement is really important. The decision to proceed with an update to the framework was based off of a request for information that we ran last year. So we basically put out an RFI that said, is it time to update the framework? And if so, what would you like to see in the changes to the framework? What we got back was that organizations find the current version of the framework to be effective to address cybersecurity risks, but obviously it's been several years since we've last looked at the framework, and so of course folks would like to see a number of changes seen to the framework. And I think we received about 130 written responses. Within those comments. We received about 3,000 or 4,000 different specific changes to the framework that we reviewed, and over the past several months, we recently published a kind of CSF 2.0 concept paper that takes a look at kind of all of the specific changes that we've heard through written comments, as well as through workshops and various one-on-one meetings. And we've kind of aggregated all of that into a list of about 18 major changes that we're proposing to make to the framework. Thus far, as I mentioned, we've had 2 workshops. The first one was fully virtual with about 4,000 attendees from 100 countries. The second one was, again, fully virtual, and then we had an in-person component that followed up the following week with a couple hundred individuals, focused squarely around the topics that were proposed in this CSF 2.0 concept paper, to really try to delve down into, okay, these are the changes that we're proposing to make. How exactly would you draft these in CSF 2.0? What's the best way to accomplish these changes? Going forward, we will release a CSF 2.0 draft that will be published this summer for public comment, as well as a third workshop soon after this fall, with the goal of publishing CSF 2.0 in early 2024. Next slide, please. So I encourage you to check out the concept paper that we published. I think it's a really nice kind of aggregation of many of the cybersecurity challenges that organizations are facing. There were 18 major changes that are organized around these kind of 6 themes that we've highlighted here on the slide. So I'll just run through a couple of these themes so that you can get an idea of the direction that we're heading with CSF 2.0. So I think the first one is we are expanding the scope of the framework. The framework was originally developed for reducing risks to critical infrastructure. Since then, though, we've recognized that many organizations are using the framework, and we didn't want organizations to have to make a determination as to whether or not they are critical infrastructure to use it. So we're going to expand the scope, as well as do a formal name change to use the informal name, which is the cybersecurity framework, as well as the formal name, which is like the framework for reducing critical infrastructure cybersecurity. We will endeavor to keep the framework a framework, and that seems to be like a pretty obvious statement, but as we saw within the comments from the community, there's really a huge amount of interest in more guidance on just addressing cybersecurity for specific technologies, for specific topics. And so it's really clear that the cybersecurity framework, while organizations are interested in keeping it simple and flexible and tech neutral, that it has a way to serve as kind of a connector to more specific cybersecurity guidance on these various topics. So we're going to focus a lot on mappings, and mappings not just to specific cybersecurity controls, so saying this control looks like this one, but here's the kind of mapping to entire sets of guidance that you can use to implement a certain portion of the framework. We're also
Sherry, just a question on CSF2. Sorry. Of all the suggested changes from the community for CSF 2.0, which was the top priority? And does it come with its own metrics, or will the previous NIST standard be referred?
Yeah, so I think, it's getting to that. So I think the probably the biggest change in terms of reverse compatibility is this focus on cybersecurity governance. So there will be a sixth function that we're adding called govern. As I mentioned, there's 5 functions right now to the framework. We're adding a 6th one, govern, to kind of re-emphasize this importance on cybersecurity governance and the role that senior leadership plays in kind of overseeing cybersecurity and ensuring that it's a priority. So that will result in several of the categories from across the framework being moved up into this new function. Because of that movement, we're obviously going to be looking at all of the current functions and seeing if any of those need to be reordered. So there will be quite a bit of changes kind of throughout the core that we're considering with CSF 2.0. I think one of the other bigger changes that we're focusing on is on cybersecurity supply chain risk management. So the additional focus on third-party risks, making sure that that is spelled out throughout the framework. Third-party risks are often handled by organizations that are separate teams within an organization than the cybersecurity team. And so we want to make sure that this topic is that the folks know when third-party risks kind of apply to a specific subcategory. And as I mentioned, we're also focused a lot on cybersecurity measurement and assessment. So that includes things like defining cybersecurity measurement, which has previously been undefined, defining terms like metrics and maturity models, so that we all have kind of a common understanding of what these terms mean, as well as I mentioned earlier, kind of looking at additional guidance on assessment for leveraging the CSF to assess a cybersecurity program. I think what we will not be doing is we will not be developing our own maturity model for the cybersecurity framework. So there are a number of organizations that have developed maturity models for each of the subcategories. You have specific actions that can be taken to implement that subcategory. We're okay if outside organizations kind of develop those types of maturity models at the subcategory level, but we think that it's more important to kind of provide the many different kind of methods and tools that organizations are using around cybersecurity measurement at a higher level, so that organizations can understand how to implement the framework as a whole, rather than looking at the kind of specific subcategory implementation at a deeper level.
Cherilyn, you mentioned that there was going to be a high level of focus on supply chain and third-party risk, and you've got it as 0.5 there as well. Has the hybrid working model and the onset of COVID and pre-post-COVID actually influenced that in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was partially influenced by COVID. I think it was also really influenced just by the fact that we've seen a number of supply chain attacks in recent years, and so the interest in this topic has increased. The framework currently covers kind of cybersecurity supply chain risks to some extent. I think in the past, organizations have been hesitant to kind of add more. When we've raised this topic 5 years ago, organizations were kind of not ready to tackle it. So now I think, given that supply chain has kind of become front of mind for many organizations, especially in response to COVID, but also in response to these recent attacks, we think that there's a lot more consensus around the issue to be able to kind of more fully address it within the framework. Next slide, please. So we also have a number of calls to action. These are kind of areas where we've specifically called out for the community to kind of contribute resources to the CSF. Things like mappings and profiles and success stories. As I mentioned, those kind of use cases around measurement and metrics that you have found helpful, or how your organization is doing this. So would certainly encourage you to kind of share those resources with us, so that and there are resources that we can share publicly, but there's also times when organizations will share more confidential materials with us. So just let us know kind of what might be most appropriate in your case. Next slide, please.
Sherry, has there been any form of analytics on the adoption of NIST globally?
So the RFI that we ran last year kind of served as a mini survey of kind of how organizations are using the framework. And I think it's pretty clear that, based off of the organizations that responded, that it's very widely used, across various sectors around the world. Within the United States, global companies are certainly using the framework. I think many, but they're probably using it, with lots of other cybersecurity standards. So, for example, ISO. You mentioned ISO and the various 27001 series. Within, I think, more medium-sized companies, we're seeing that the cybersecurity framework is the dominant standard that organizations are leveraging for their cybersecurity programs. It's certainly something that has seen kind of widespread adoption within critical infrastructure, especially if you look at the success of the kind of financial sector profile. As we move forward with CSF 2.0, I think that the areas that we're focusing on are the sectors that I think are kind of just generally struggling with cybersecurity. So focusing quite a bit more on academia, looking at, for example, how universities secure their resources, as well as K through 12 schools, looking at state and local governments. So we've spent a lot of time developing resources for the federal level. So now I think a lot of attention has turned towards state and local governments who are overseeing a lot of information and a lot of critical infrastructure, but maybe less resourced to be able to address it, as well as looking at kind of smaller businesses across all sectors. I think that there's been a lot of calls for like a CSF Lite for smaller organizations. We are still reviewing whether there is enough consistency across all organizations that are smaller. I think there's certainly going to be a number of different risks that exist in organizations depending on the specific sector that they sit in. So at the moment, I think it's unlikely that we develop kind of a CSF for small businesses. But I think what we will be focused on is kind of more small business guidance on how to leverage the cybersecurity framework for their purposes. In terms of kind of CSF 2.0 and engagement, would certainly encourage all of you to get engaged in the process. We are doing direct kind of one-on-one engagement with organizations, especially, forums like this. I think we talked a bit about potentially coming back later in the year once we have a CSF 2.0 draft, and we can go through that and get your feedback on kind of the more specific changes that are on paper. We also have more formal mechanisms, such as the workshops and public comment periods. And so would certainly encourage you to participate in those as well. So any further questions, Alisha?
Yeah, I've got one. Will NIST TSF2 allow control testing across policy standards and operational practice per pillar and category?
Can you say that again?
Will the new framework allow control testing across policy standards and operational practice per pillar and category?
I think so. That's an interesting question. So I think the cybersecurity framework is intended to sit at kind of a higher level. So we prefer to not call the subcategories controls because they're cybersecurity outcomes. But I think that there's been a lot of interest in kind of developing additional mappings to specific cybersecurity controls for specific policies, for specific technologies. And so, and certainly everybody is interested in doing this kind of in an online automated fashion, just given the amount of information that everyone's dealing with. So we do have, at NIST, we have a center called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. This is a federal R&D center that takes our cybersecurity guidance and develops specific practical technical solutions for kind of NIST cybersecurity guidance or international standards. And we do it working with technology vendors, where we will actually sign a R&D legal agreement with them, and they will serve as the kind of authors of the guidance that we develop. So, control testing is certainly something that we're working on kind of other portions of NIST, but probably not associated with CSF 2.0.
And will there be better coverage of the basic privacy and data protection and board reporting aspects?
Yeah, so we have a really great framework focused on privacy risks called the NIST Privacy Framework. It is meant to sit alongside the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So you'll see the functions kind of line up along with the cybersecurity framework. The privacy framework, I think, has developed some really great adoption in recent years. And so we are, for CSF 2.0, we've made a decision to keep these two frameworks separate so that the two disciplines can kind of sit side by side. We'll see what we decide to do with CSF 3.0 if that's then time to merge cybersecurity and privacy frameworks. But for now, I think there's a lot of benefits, and it's largely based off of stakeholder input. We didn't get a single stakeholder expressing interest in merging the two as we move forward with 2.0.
Okay, moving on. We've got a question around any insight or feedback as to why EU governments and organizations are now implementing this in relation to the NIS2 directive.
As to why, which governments?
EU governments.
Oh, EU governments. Yeah, so they are. I can't speak for the EU as a whole. But there are a number of European countries that have adopted the cybersecurity framework for purposes of the NIS directive. So Italy and Poland are two examples that have kind of adopted the framework in whole and have made it mandatory for use by critical services within the country. There's also a number of other countries within the EU that reference the cybersecurity framework as part of their cybersecurity strategies. So you look at Israel and the UK are both really good examples of countries that I think have embraced the framework as part of their overall cybersecurity strategies. So there is quite a bit of adoption within the EU of the cybersecurity framework. As we move forward with CSF 2.0, international engagement will certainly be a big priority for us. We are talking to different foreign governments. Italy was a panelist at our last workshop a few weeks ago. And so, the update process serves as a really nice platform to have some of those international discussions around cybersecurity in an informal manner. And so it's certainly going to be a priority for us to kind of increase that engagement as well as increase alignment with international standards. So we are looking at the ways that standards have changed in the past 5 years, seeing if there are kind of any big shifts that we're seeing within the international standards landscape that should be reflected back into CSF 2.0. And then once CSF 2.0 is published, we will also be engaging in international standards bodies to ensure alignment that way as well. Obviously, there's going to be lots of cybersecurity standards and cybersecurity regulations. Hopefully, though, the framework will serve kind of as a tool that will still be leveraged regardless of the kind of mandates that organizations are subject to, because they find it effective to leverage.
Just a comment, mappings and supporting resources are key to 2.0. I urge caution adding lots of new sections. Simplicity is key, and don't overcomplicate. And it's one of the common reasons companies use NIST. So just a comment, not a question. Just putting it out there. It's simple.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's certainly consistent with what we've heard, is that folks like the simplicity of the framework. And certainly mappings are one way to kind of extend the framework without actually adding to the framework, and weighing it down further. So hopefully you'll hold us to that as we try to incorporate everyone's feedback into CSF 2.0. But at the end of the day, hopefully we'll be able to keep it flexible and short and sweet.
Thanks, Sherry. Sherry, do you want to just conclude and then Ben can take over?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you guys today. Happy to continue the discussion in the future, and feel free. Encourage you guys to engage in the process for CSF 2.0. I think your insights will be really valuable as we work to kind of update the framework. So thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you, Alisha. As always, you're becoming a little bit my CISO muse by now, by all the the activities that we've been doing over the last month. Let me quickly close off the meeting with the upcoming events that we have scheduled. One of them is on adversarial artificial intelligence, which is a research paper by TNO. scheduled actually for next week. So I'll probably be spamming you either tonight or tomorrow to invite you for that event as well. That's organized by Seco Institute. The other one that's coming up is third-party risk by Tom Gillis. He's the group CISO from UCB Pharma, and moderated by Ivan Milenkovic, the group CISO at WebHelp. We have an AI workshop scheduled with Etsy from France, a NIST 2 use case, following up nicely with this presentation. And Cherilyn, if I'm correct, and then we're trying to schedule another meeting based on the draft somewhere in June. That will either be a presentation for the entire group, or maybe with the first with the smaller group of CISOs of the CISO tribe, to get some feedback on that. But either way, whether we do it behind closed doors, we will always share that information and those insights afterwards in a public webinar as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. And Cherilyn, Alisha, thank you once more. And thank you for attending. See you next week, hopefully. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ron. Thanks, everybody.